Good evening, and welcome to another edition of Slave Food. And so, slave food is for where doctors Columbus Batiste and Dr. Eric Walsh explore the role of racism as a unique form of stress and the weaponization of food in the creation of health disparities in African American communities, irrespective of income. They discovered that eating a whole food, plant based diet in urban communities is not only possible, but is the key to eliminating health disparities. Today, the doctors will be talking about the benefits of sunlight and exercise. Did you know that sunlight can help regulate our sleep cycle and promote deeper recovery? Another important benefit that comes with sensible sun exposure is vitamin D. And vitamin D will help strengthen your bones, which can prevent bone fractures and chronic muscle pain. Longer days and shorter nights signal the beginning of summer. This time of year is when everyone is maximizing their time outside. But did you know that there are some amazing health and athletic benefits of exercising and getting sun exposure consistently? Despite what you've heard about sunshine related skin cancer and harmful ultraviolet radiation, there are real tangible benefits to both your athleticism and your health in getting sun exposure. In fact, I'm going to let the doctors tell you more. So, um, welcome, Columbus and Eric, to the show, and go right ahead and get into it.
All right, all right. Thank you, thank you. Good to see you. What's up, man? How are you?
I'm good. I had to race home from from clinic.
I
Normally, I
s-
try not to do this in scrubs, but
I
um,
know. See,
I did.
I was like, you're joining me now. You're getting the scrub look. I like it.
I didn't have time to change, but I'm really glad to be on. There's a lot going on. We are facing higher and higher heat indexes this summer with a huge heat wave about to hit the Southwest where you are. Specifically, I saw some numbers on Arizona. So we want to just encourage everybody to stay cool, stay hydrated.
Yes.
And as we talk about the things we're going to talk about today, always in the context of being wise about how you do things. But this heat wave is serious this year. I mean, it's been hitting
It
all over the
is.
country. This global warming thing they keep telling us about.
That's not happening. They say this. Some say it's not happening. Some say it is, but it looks apparent it
Yeah.
is when we're seeing these climate shifts that are there.
At least the temperature keeps going up every year. That every summer it gets hotter. That I can agree with no matter what. So
Absolutely. And it's all over the place. But the funny part is what people out there watching don't know about us is that sometimes we'll share little stuff. We'll share articles, we'll share little news clippings and books, whatever it is, and kind of talk about that. But one thing I didn't get a chance to talk to you, what really prompted this whole idea of, man, we need to dig into exercise right now, nature, and the whole bit. So Eric knows I love sports, right? I love basketball, I love football, the Cowboys, the Lakers. My Lakers did some work inside the free agency, so we're gonna
I
see how
did.
things go. But if I'm not listening to straight cardiology literature and reading that, or listening to health and lifestyle wellness books, Audible, then what I'm listening to is I'm listening to sports. And so I caught this show. I caught this show of Steven Jackson and Matt Barnes, and they were doing this podcast, and it brought me back because he told this story about being in that at what's my man's name who was in Terminator, Tyrese. He was at
Uh,
Tyrese's house, right? And so Steven Jackson, who used to play with the San Antonio Spurs, Pacers, et cetera, was saying, man, I went to Tyrese's house, and he was like, basically the sum of his story was, let's go for a walk. And he was like, go for a walk? He said, where I grew up, you went for a walk down to someone else's house, but you didn't go for a walk. He said, we started on this walk and there were trees lining the streets. He said, we ended up inside this park. He said, and in his own words, he said, man, I felt like I was in heaven. He said, all this greenery all around. And it got me thinking just really about growing up in Compton and how we drove to the park. There was no like heavily lined streets with massive amounts of trees and everything. We walked for a purpose. Other
not,
than that, yeah, not at all. And so it got me thinking about just about what we talk about on this platform, right? We talk about stress, we talk about disparities, we talk about resiliency in ways. And so we'll start off with resiliency on exercise and nature and sunlight. but we also understand that there's layers of disparities in certain communities that
Mhm.
really has prevented them from embracing some of these simple tools of movement, of sunlight, etc., that's so useful to them. So I just wanted to kind of share a little bit of that backdrop. I'll have to send you that clip one of these. All right.
That would be awesome. And we've been, I did a series on New Start last year, and these were some of the topics that I learned a lot about in preparing those messages. And it's undervalued medicine, honestly.
Yes.
What we're going to talk about today, and it's free. I think that's
Absolutely.
what's most important for people to remember. It's absolutely free. And there's no corruption in the industries running it. So you definitely want to jump in and start doing some of this stuff.
Yeah, no such thing as big sunlight or big exercise out there trying to run scams on you at all. This is all free and accessible to you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good stuff. So yeah, I mean, when we look at exercise, I mean, exercise sometimes is like it's like a cuss word. Some people like exercise and diet. I'm not touching it with a 10-foot pole. But I mean, there's so many benefits of exercise. Like we don't even need the slides to start talking about the benefits of exercise. I mean, we really don't. We really don't. And I mean, the crazy part is I always kind of tell the story, or I've told it really about my daughter kind of being grumpy and upset and taking her out saying, let's go for a walk. And she was just grumpy. And we get going. And all of a sudden she's starting to laugh at my jokes. And by the time we get back, she's smiling and actually, looking at me a little bit lovingly in those teenage years a while back, and actually admitted, Daddy, I feel a little bit better. I feel better. Right. That's the power of sunlight. That's the power of exercise. Absolutely. When we get moving.
And I want us to, while we're on this slide, let me just say, as a physician, this is what we would prefer patients actually turn to. What this slide says is underrated, and I don't think it's broadcasted enough in our society. Research actually says that if you exercise, that physical activity is similar in its effects, comparable to or slightly greater than psychotherapy, pharmacotherapy, which is drugs like Prozac and sertraline, all these different drugs for depression, anxiety, and psychological distress. That's I mean, if you really think about that, that means if you can get outside and do 35 minutes to an hour of a brisk walk every day, it's better than taking Prozac, which so many people in our country are on. And part of the reason they have to be on these drugs is because they have a poor diet. Mm-hmm. And the stresses of modern society. I mean, everything from what we're just talking about, the heat wave, to everything else. So I don't want to. I want people to really see this as we go forward talking about this.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's why we have the slides up, because it's important to know that there's actually research. This is not just hearsay or what my mom's cousins told me to do about going outside or going on back. This is about real, true science that's beginning to increase exponentially and telling us that. I don't have a slide that represents this. I don't think we do, but such study. And thank you for putting me on to the book Spark. And it really, what it really did was it congealed a lot of the stuff I had read inside one location. So for those of you who haven't read the book Spark, it speaks to a lot of the power of exercise for mental health, but it also speaks to something for our kids, right? In terms of like their cognitive function. Right. Just that ability to understand. And I don't know if any of you out there, sometimes what I'll do is I'll hop on the treadmill, and I'm on the treadmill. Now I have to have my iPad, or I have a little mini desk, and I'll start putting down notes. If I go for a walk outside, or I put it on there, because things start churning, ideas start kind of just coming to me in those moments. And this is what really studies have shown. They did studies on kids and showing that when they gave them 0 period PE before school started, that the test scores increased exponentially when they had these kids just become active. And the sad part was I wasn't even familiar with this literature. And so when my kids were young, I remember like thinking, what is this teacher trying to have my kids do out here exercising? They got asthma and everything else. I'm trying to get them together. And she's like trying to get them exercising before class. But there was actually rational thought to the thought process. It wasn't conveyed effectively, but there's power inside these simple things.
And one of the things that we try to give everyone who listens in a unique perspective on these issues. And one of them is that the physical education classes, regardless of what time of day, are less prominent in our schools today. Some schools don't have them at all, in an effort to try and increase test scores. Others, it's just a paltry, kind of ragtag attempt at physical activity. So, it says a lot. The schools want to perform better on tests, but they've literally removed one of the best things. The other thing is, of course, the quality of a lot of times of the school lunches. So remember how important it really is to, to get your kids active. It does help in their brain development and in their learning.
That's right. Extremely important. And so this is something close to my heart when you start looking literally from an overall, from a physiologic standpoint. What exactly does exercise do to the body, right? And so we understand that it has a plethora of actions that it does. And so we understand clinically it decreases, looking at column 2 from a psychological perspective, depression and stress, and increases social support. I'll tell you, my mom complains about her dog, but the dog does one thing, and that makes her take her outside to go for a walk. And she said, she just was saying to me the other day that as a result of her dog, Precious, she's forced to meet people. She knows people all in the neighborhood. They would say, oh, my dog's name is such and such. Oh, it's such and such. Oh, how's she doing? Oh, I think she has this. And it forces this social community that begins to develop. And so there's so much power that's there. We look to as well from an atherosclerotic standpoint and just looking at what happens in terms of plaque buildup. And we know it lowers the blood pressure. We see that the resistance in time. So actually during exercise, if you were to look at exercise in the short term, you're thinking, oh man, this is not good for us. Blood pressure rises, heart rate rises, all these things. But long term, it's priming your body for improved functionality. And that's one of the key things of exercise, the insulin sensitivity. So decreasing diabetes. It helps decrease the stickiness of your platelets, decreasing your risk of stroke and heart attack. It does all these things, decreases the thickness of the blood, and improves the blood flow to the heart muscle, which is extremely important. So we understand there's power.
So there's a couple of things I would say. One of them is, and I know we're going to get to it, it does the same thing psychologically. By stressing your body in a controlled fashion for exercise, you actually train it to be able to handle life better in general. It does that for your heart, as you see here. One of the things that's important on this slide, a lot of patients come in and they have atrial fibrillation or they have heart arrhythmias, and they ask, what could I have done differently? One of them seems to be you could have actually regularly exercised to reduce the risk of having an arrhythmia, and that's on the far right side of the slide. That's huge, because there's not really much I know of that can do that. And you're a cardiologist, you could tell us if that's different. The other the question I have for you, Dr. Batiste, that one there, decreasing myocardial oxygen demand, is incredibly important. If you decrease the demand for oxygen for your heart, it means the threshold at which your heart is going to be damaged when you have an incident for whatever reason, when you're in a plane and it depressurizes and the oxygen goes down, the threshold where you would have damage to your heart actually goes down. How does exercise do that? I think that's one of the most fascinating things on the slide.
Well, I mean, and it's simple. Once again, so we have to look on the larger scale. When we look short term, you're thinking, well, it's increasing the work of the heart. I'm putting the heart under more stress, more demand that's here in that moment. But when you look at how you're conditioning the heart to work more efficiently in the moment, so we can understand if I'm struggling as a young child to pull something, to lift something, to drag something because my muscles aren't developed. As I grow older, I become a teenager and a young adult, and I begin to put on these guns that pack on my arms here, these massive guns, that are there. What ends up happening is now that work becomes much easier. It becomes more efficient. And so the heart works in a very similar fashion, that now the work of the heart is much more efficient. That means the oxygen demand goes down in its need. Now, why is that important? Because your arteries are delivering blood flow to the heart muscle. And so we understand that atherosclerotic process begins by the age of 10, before that time, and progresses silently. And so if you can, everything you can do to improve that endothelium, that lining of the vessel, to improve the efficiency of the heart pumping stronger, what you're doing is you're priming yourself to avoid disease. Now, I'll say one other thing about you comment about the atrial fibrillation. So this is important. So what we know is it begins like a U-shaped curve, that you see a decrease in the incidence of arrhythmia, of atrial fibrillation, others. But at a certain point, if you exercise to the tilt, you're running marathons, ultra marathoners. we're starting to see an increase
Wow,
inside atrial fibrillation when you get to that level and you're
deep.
doing it. And that makes sense. We even see a breakdown of the muscle tissue level we call troponins that tend to rise after a massive amount of overexertion. So there is a balance. And so we're going to talk a bit more about that. But this is, I mean, we're speaking my language. I can go into Nerville with this, man.
One of the things I want to also mention is when, I remember being in med school and residency, and we'd get a patient with a very low heart rate. And one of the things I remember the first time we saw that, and the guy's, his heart rate was like 42 or something. And, a couple of the med students like freaked out to the attending. And he said, "Is this guy an athlete?" And they said, "Let me go back in there." And they asked, and the guy was it was in Miami at med school. He's like a world-class athlete of some kind. And they come like, "Yeah, he is." He said, "Well, that's because he's an athlete." That's one of the ways that the efficiency shows is that your heart actually has to beat less to do the same job, which would make sense that it needs less oxygen.
All right, so I'm gonna break this one last point. So what we talk about, right, is so your heart rate times your stroke volume equals your cardiac output, right? And so cardiac output and heart rate combined together as a product equals in total peripheral resistance. If I want to maintain my blood pressure or total peripheral resistance, and my cardiac output is improved because my stroke volume from my heart efficiency has gone up, I don't need a high heart rate to support that any longer.
Right.
That heart rate can go down as my stroke volume increases and hence my cardiac output. So now all of a sudden, my heart's more efficient. My heart rate's lower. So I'm gonna tell you that when my Apple Watch, no promo, I'm not giving you no kind of play, Apple, for this unless you start giving me some back. When it hits me, it buzzes me that alert, your heart rate's in the 30s or 40s, I'm happy. Now, for those of you out there listening, I don't want you to be happy if your heart rate's in the 30s and 40s. You still need to get that checked out, but there is a chance that your heart is working efficiently at that level.
Awesome.
So it's good stuff. Good stuff. And we talked about this already, the power really of the blood pressure lowering, that stroke volume. We talked about it already. If we can improve that endothelial function, that super lining of the vessels become less stiff, along with the fact that we are helping the heart to work more efficiently, my blood pressure lowers. There's not really a need, and it's perfusing everything from head to the toe. And we talked about that last week for the men out there. The power of improving the blood pressure is extremely important all the way around. This is another one that's key. Now, this one's important. I always tell people, this is the cheat code. There's several cheat codes to defeat chronic disease. This is one that's so simple because all you have to do after your meal is walk. This study just told us that if you just walk around, at first there was the original studies for like 10 minutes, but these more recent studies have shown us that 2 to 5 minutes of walking can significantly lower your blood sugar levels after you ingest your meal. That's the secret cheat code.
So one thing I want to pump up places like Weimar Lifestyle Center in Northern California, Wildwood in Georgia, Uchee Pines in Alabama, Black Hills up in South Dakota. They have a concept that if you visit these places called a digestive walk. And what they do is they have the patients actually go for a short walk, brief, not aggressive, not assertive, not walk right after they eat for 5 to 15 minutes. And they that's part of the way that they actually help it in the time that they're in the center, actually bring down their blood sugar levels and begin to correct it. So one of the things I tell patients is if you live in a house with stairs, even if you just go up and down the stairs a couple times after you eat, it'll help because it's cold here in Connecticut in the winter. You may not go outside, but if you live in a house with a basement and an upstairs and you just go up and down the stairs for a few times, that's actually really good at bringing that blood sugar down. And it's a quick, easy way. And again, it costs nothing. You go you get diabetes and go to the hospital, or you go to a doctor, you're gonna get put on medicine that costs money, finger sticks. This doesn't cost anything.
Not at all. And a different talk for a different day. But even with the validation of metformin, a very commonly used medication out there, when we looked at the comparison to lifestyle, which included aggressively nutrition and exercise, walking, it was more powerful. It's powerful. There's so much that we can do that's within our own grasp as it relates to it. So this is a question I always get, Doc, what's the best exercise I should do? What's the best exercise that's out there? And so, many of you out there may be asking, number one, I'll tell you, forget about what the studies have shown. And there is something that has been suggested is that the one that you're going to keep on doing, is the best
Absolutely.
exercise. That's the best exercise.
And so one of the things the picture shows you is that there's a group of people. So if you can get an exercise partner, and like you mentioned your daughter and going for that walk, if there are people you go for a walk with regularly, you don't have to go for a walk with the same people every day. Go with your spouse or your kids or your best friend or whatever. But by getting a group and getting conversation, what you find is you forget you're walking. So if you just start at walking, I like basketball. Unfortunately, it's not easy to get good basketball games in all the time. But it does the same thing. And to your point earlier, I actually get my best ideas for all kinds of stuff when I'm playing ball. It's really weird.
No, for sure. And it's crazy whether or not, was this paddle tennis is taking over the world right now,
Paddle, yeah. I've seen, what's it called again? Pickleball.
Yeah. I played in high school for a little bit. We would do it with tennis and everything else like that, but fun sport. But we're seeing this kind of stuff take off. But here they're talking about really a form of just kind of walking with pole walking. That when you walk with the poles, that combination of use of upper body with lower body is one of the most efficient ways. And they looked at that for a comparison, looking at perfusion and looking at symptoms and everything like that. But we know everything from high intensity interval training to cycling but at the end of the day, it's what you like. Keep doing it.
And I want to, before we move on from exercise, last thing I want to say is when I do talks, I'm going to be doing some around the country here in the next few months around how to help kids learn better. We mentioned it earlier. Yes. I just want to remind everybody that part of what happens was 79% of U.S. kids don't get enough exercise. That's what the studies show. But it's the epinephrine. It's that adrenaline rush that you kind of get when you exercise that actually helps to improve and stimulate brain growth as well. And I really want to emphasize that exercise, the only thing that actually creates what we call one of the few things that creates neuroplasticity and allows the brain to change. So one of the ways that you actually can overcome a history where you have damaged your brain with drugs or with trauma or whatever, exercise has been shown to actually allow the brain to regenerate. There's a great scripture in the Bible that says, God will restore unto you the land that the locusts have taken. If you want back what was taken from you in terms of brain function because of maybe something you did in the past or life, whatever you did in the past, exercise is one of the few things that can actually cause you to regrow brain and actually have it heal from what you may have done.
That's right. So true. And we didn't touch on cancer, the benefits of cancer, whether or not just for prevention, whether or not to augment treatment. I've lobbied heavily. I'm a big proponent of cardiac rehabilitation, which is centered around exercise. But I believe that we need to have the same type of platform for cancer patients, that we should have a cancer rehabilitation that's looking at nutrition, it's looking at stress, it's looking at exercise in a prescriptive way becomes extremely important. So yes, that's absolutely important. Now here's one of the things, picture of the park bench, like maybe where Steven Jackson kind of landed inside the area that's there. But it's so, nature is around us and you think, well, yeah, just walk out in nature. But with the development of the urban communities that we have right now, there's many people who have never left the area of their city limits. There are many people who have never seen a forest, who've never seen a beach, who've never gone inside of nature like that. That there's minimal grass areas inside there. So this is why I think it's important. And believe it or not, there's actually a fair amount of science around nature. And even as a result, I've been writing my book. And as a result of it, one of the things that I have done is I will go and spend some time in my backyard. Now, my backyard is not a forest, but it has a lot of trees and so forth. And with the pool and the mountains and behind, it gives me a sense of peace. And the studies have shown that just spending 20 minutes in nature, it can lower the stress hormone levels that are there. And this has been replicated. This study in 2019 is not the sole study as it relates to the impact and power of stress hormones in nature.
Yeah, and one of the things we'll talk more about it probably in a minute, but I definitely want to make sure I bring in the forest bathing.
Yes,
this Japanese thing. I did some research on that. It is really powerful. What happens, and it has a lot to do with what happens to the radiation from the sun. We're going to talk about the sun more, so maybe we'll bring it up then. But getting out into nature, what you describe by going in your backyard really is a true phenomenon, and a lot of people tell you they feel it. the tragedies. I remember being a youth pastor in Riverside with kids who lived that close to the Southern California beaches and had never been to the beach. And we took them for the first time to the beach at 15, 16 years of age. And they grew up 45 minutes from a beach. So, you know, you got to get your kids out there, get them to these places, widen their horizons, and then, of course, get the health benefits as well.
Yeah. I mean, it really truly is amazing when you begin looking at all this stuff. And this is almost a reflection, right? So we know that a lot of the concepts of forest bathing really kind of took place inside of Japan and Asia and so forth. And they're seeing a lot of expansion of the effects, whether or not this slide speaks to blood pressure and combined with in terms of the stress exposure to the reduction in symptoms. And this slide speaking more to just what you're talking about with forest bathing and also really your immune system. I mean, coming out of the pandemic, I mean, I think everyone's on 10 about what's my immune system doing and everything.
And so when you see these natural killer cells working better after forest bathing, the other thing that I found in one of the studies I read was that it lasts for like 6 days.
Yes.
So, you know, for those who are keep Shabbat, keep Sabbath, it's profound. If you hike through the forest on the Sabbath, the protective effects actually will last. Many of them will last through a week from the benefit of that afternoon hike that you can get in there, squeeze in sometimes because that's your day of rest. So we're not talking about rest today, but the activity you do, that appreciating nature. And somebody said this to me once. You keep the Sabbath because of to honor the God of creation, but it is an act of recreation. And one of the reasons you want to get out into nature is you appreciate what was created, but it gives you a chance to kind of be reborn as well, especially emotionally.
Yeah, and I mean, just when you look at how, I mean, it's amazing the concepts, right? You know, this isn't brand new. So a lot of these concepts aren't brand new, but now it's amazing when you look at science and you look at how we're uncovering the effects of these practices, of these activities. And when you do feel at peace, I'm going to tell you. So when we go on vacation, this is bad. This is good and bad at the same time. So when we go on vacation, when I'm here at home with work and everything else, I talk about stress because I feel stress. Now, I don't perceive stress, but my body feels stress.
Absolutely.
And so what's so interesting is I will hold it in my neck, as probably 99% of Americans do, that on a regular basis. And when I sleep restfully, I'll wake up with a sore neck at times. And a lot of times it may match the amount of projects I have going on, the responsibilities, things of the day. But what's so interesting is when I go away and we go to our secret spot, the wife and I, and the kids at times, and I don't have good internet reception, I sleep like a baby, but this time I sleep like a baby and don't wake up with any neck discomfort. The bed's not any better. The pillows aren't any better. All of a sudden, I am just like amazed. I'm doing exceptionally well. That's the power of nature. What's the difference? Ocean water that's there, the beach, the sunlight, the sand, all these things are playing a role and are giving me peace and calm internally. So
next year we're gonna have to make a trip with you out there, man. We got.
I'm saying, I've been telling you for a while. That's my happy place. You see me smiling. I'm just thinking about the spot and I'm smiling, you know. But we have more important things this year right now. But this is important. You know, this is the other thing that when we look at. Here's the other part is that I spoke about this, alluded to this earlier. But when you live closer to just these green spaces, these parks and things of that nature, that you're more likely to engage in physical activity. And that's the thing that's amazing. You go to some cities and you'll see people out there just jogging.
Oh, I love
They're
that.
out there stretching and doing their thing. Got the dogs out there. And
Central Park in New York is like that. It's a beautiful thing. You see that. But I want to say this in terms, we talk a lot about health disparities.
Yes.
You know, and we are blessed, to be able to live in neighborhoods I live in now compared to what I did in times past. But I can tell you, many of my neighbors, their backyard is a park. I mean, they got all of the equipment for the kids and trees and massive amounts of space. And that's good. That's really good for their kids. If you don't live in that situation, you do have to take. I remember my mother taking us to the park, walking us to the park in Bloomfield, Connecticut, when we were young, and making sure we got outside and do stuff. So you as a parent have to figure that out. When I worked in Orange County, I remember for the health department, I remember talking to some of the Latina moms and said, hey, you got to go outside. And they said, no, the park's not safe. The park's not. And we came up with a program, or we didn't do it, but somebody came up with a program where they actually took over like a parking garage, the top of a parking garage, so that the kids could actually go out there and play. Now, that's not ideal, but there's innovative ways to try and get kids outside playing and off the video games. And we got to work together with our communities, our churches, our schools, all have to cooperate to get that to happen.
And see, here's the part, what's so important about what you said. The intent of why you're doing it was to provide health, not for business. So we've seen, and we've talked about this for those of you who follow us, we've talked about really the work of many fast food restaurants who create these playground areas, these safe zones for inside of these communities that are disparate, for people to bring their kids and have fast food while they play inside the playground area. That's not what we're talking about.
No,
we don't want to use those spots as a spot to get some activity
and to get outdoor. Not a lot of space to move around in them.
No, there's not. We want you outdoors inside of where there's trees, and it's given back to you. And I think as humans, we can learn a lot from trees. It sounds crazy, but the community of trees, not only what they give to us, but what they give to each other, and it's crazy. I won't get into that a whole lot because that's a different talk for a different day. But you look at their sharing of nutrients. That the biggest tree is looking out for the smaller tree that's down below that's there. And there's so much research that's really gone into some of these things. That's amazing. So I mean, living in green space, it's just phenomenal in terms of people more likely to be active and lower body mass and blood pressure and decreased cardiovascular disease, to live longer, have better sleep, lower birth weights, less mental disorders. So there's just huge benefit that we see overall. I couldn't help. I was looking for a picture of Superman. I was thinking about Superman. And I'm not a heavy comic person, but apparently this is in one of those alternate universes. They have a bunch of different Supermans or whatever else. I couldn't help but put this picture one up here. But one of the key things that I think was amazing, I don't think the person, I'm not sure, I need to research this a bit more. I didn't have a chance before this. When they came up with the idea for Superman, just the fact that he gets his power from the light, from the sun. Now, spiritually, you can make an analogy to that power from the sun, but also from a practical standpoint, just the energy that you get from the sun itself, from the yellow sun, that reinvigorates him, that empowers him, allows him to resist and recover. We see a lot of similarities just in life and inside of health in general.
Absolutely.
So this is one that's obvious. We talk about serotonin. That's triggered. And I think you were alluding to this.
Yeah,
when you were talking about kind of being outside.
Absolutely. This is one that's really important because serotonin is also the precursor for melatonin. And we'll get to that in a second. So people are taking all these melatonin supplements and stuff, but anything you do, from the consumption of whole food plant-based sources of tryptophan which is the precursor to serotonin, to doing this to even stimulate more serotonin, will help you with your melatonin levels. So being out in the sun during the day at the right times will actually help you sleep better at night. So here's why that's important. Your lifestyle becomes a flywheel. You do one good behavior and it helps the next good behavior. The more you sleep, the more easier it is to control your appetite. So you start to see the flywheel start to turn, so that you can get healthier by doing all these things kind of in unison.
Yes. Yeah, that early morning sunlight's extremely important. The first thing, a half hour, 20 minutes, half hour, extremely important to kind of help reset those melanocytes and so forth. And so we know, and this talks about this, right? You want to get sunlight anywhere on your arms, your face, everything of that sort, in order to try and get the vitamin D boosting. Now, obviously, we understand that many may have a fairer skin, and so you have to be careful, and you need to wear the appropriate amount of coverage in the timing of the day and protection that's there. And we also understand the need for more sunlight at times for people of color, right? In order to kind of get the vitamin D.
To get the same amount of vitamin D. And remember, there are actually studies that show, especially if you're getting your sunlight at dawn and dusk, more sun exposure actually can reduce the risk of skin cancer. So the problem for a lot of the risk of skin cancer we have now is people go out in the height of the day and lay bare lots of their body, and they're getting it all the time and not protecting themselves. But if you're doing it at the right times of the day, and here's what's deep is that you can cover your skin right? With light clothing, and a lot of the benefits of the sun will go through your clothing. So you don't act, or you can be in the shade and you get some of the, as we'll talk about in a second, some of the benefits of sunlight as well.
Yeah, that heat, feeling that heat and that
Yep.
type of UV
That
that comes through is extremely important. Yeah, so this is important. I mean, this is something I stumbled on. I wasn't taught in med school, but research and looking that really the skin actually contains these nitric oxide stores. And so for those of you out there who may not recall, nitric oxide is a substance that can help dilate the vessels, right? It helps empower, look at the endothelium, that lining of the vessels, that this nitric oxide can dilate the vessels. And so one of the areas where it's stored is actually in the skin. And so by receiving sunlight, the UV radiation, it can now convert it to an active form that then can help. And this may be a mechanism of why the blood pressure is lower, why there may be a decreased burden of cardiovascular disease in those who are exposed to more exercise and sunlight outdoors and this green exercise, so to speak. And the same very similar studies suggest a reduction in the metabolic syndrome, which means weight, but also in terms of diabetes. We look just from sunlight exposure itself.
Absolutely. Very powerful stuff.
That is, and this they've all sorts of things, and this is just what science does. Started looking at subcutaneous white adipose tissue and finding that just from the use from exposure to the sun, this blue light, the one of the UV radiations, that the visible light, that it's able to decrease the amount of the subcutaneous white adipose tissue. So I mean, it's there. Listen, there's no souls. I think the point of why we get into some of these things is that it's easy to sit back and think, okay, I just need to eat healthfully, and you do, but you can't neglect the other aspects of life. You can't neglect the power being of outdoors, and this is the part where it's so important. We see all these studies, and we all know about checking our vitamin D levels. So much came to bear during COVID about our vitamin D levels. There's been a lot in the realm of cardiology in terms of low vitamin D levels and cardiovascular events. The one thing, at least in the realm of cardiovascular disease, that has not been consistent is replacement of the vitamin D by oral supplementation doesn't reduce that risk back down, doesn't lower that risk. That's elevated.
Wow.
To me, what that implies, it implies that the benefit is not just that this is a surrogate marker.
Absolutely.
It's a surrogate marker. And so we have to kind of get to, well, what is the root that I'm missing out on? I'm missing out on the sunlight. You may say, well, I'm tan. No, you need to be out there in the sun. I live in California, and and if I'm in the car all day and in the hospital and I don't spend time outdoors, I'm not getting adequate amounts. Absolutely.
And one of the things I want to say about this is what's fascinating about it, if you think about it, is you look at a lot of people who live in the more tropical parts of the world. They seem to do better with weight management, and we often think about, well, they're just their diet. But I know when I go to the land of my parents, Jamaica, people spend a lot more time outside. You see people walking to and from where they're going, and if this shrinks the fat cells and they're eating a more unprocessed diet, which many of them are, unfortunately that's changing as they're being invaded with fast food joints. KFC is like number one down there. But this is one of the things that is actually relevant, and people pay a lot of money to go and get what they try and cryotherapy, freeze the fat cells. The visible light can do this. That is a powerful statement and something a lot of people don't know.
Yep. Something we all have to kind of get at. And so, we talk a lot about disparities, and disparities we speak about in terms of racial disparities, but there's also financial disparities. There's also a lot of other issues that are there. And we see that this, believe it or not, that there are disparities in terms of engaging in exercise, the ability to be exposed to nature, and being exposed in terms of really the propensity towards like sunlight. So we see this, right? So females, racial, ethnic minorities living in areas of poverty remain the most likely to be inactive. And I think you described this when you talked about the Latino community and the fear of the violence from a neighborhood park that's there.
Yep.
So we get that. Yeah. And you think Orange County, they don't have any problems, but there are pockets everywhere.
There's pockets,
everywhere. So there's another one that kind of basically looked from a financial perspective and talked about income less than $25,000 a year, that the activity level fell to 26.6% in 2021 from 34.1% in 2013. So roughly about 8 years. or so they saw that drop. For families that were 25 to 50,000 income, the participation, it fell to 35.7 from 38. But in those above 100,000, so obviously a wealthier family, the activity level actually rose from 46, it rose to 46% from 40, basically from 44%. So we see there is a disparity. Now, there's a lot of things that can play a role in this. You talked about defunding and cutting the time in terms of for physical education inside public schools. And so higher income may mean higher a more preponderance of private schools.
Yeah, exactly.
Or schools that are financed, right? There's a big issue that happened here recently with affirmative action. And one of the issues is in terms of what's the funding like for basic public education inside of communities at risk? Is it equal funding that's based upon property tax and so forth, that I will have the equal access to resources? And so when we look at some of the things that are there, this may play a substantial role into resources.
And I want to go back and highlight that one, you know, in the neighborhood, in, you know, wealthier neighborhoods, those kids are going to they're going to do swimming, they're going to do tennis, they're going to go to one of the it's an amazing summer camp near where I'm at here that our clinics actually, you know, during the summer take care of the kids and stuff if something happens. It is the most amazing physical experience these kids will ever have for 6 weeks of pure exercise of all types, but it's very expensive. So poor children, even though I applaud the guy who runs it, he actually saves 10% of his slots for inner city kids from New York and Philly and stuff. So he does great work, but every kid won't be able to do that. And then again, the backyard of the neighborhood, you live in the right neighborhood, you don't need a park. Your house is the park. You know, your neighborhood is the park. So, you know, all of that plays into this. And it's not one for one, like you said, but it does play into this. And it's something that each family has to think about it. The government may not get around to fixing it for you before your kids move out of your house. So you do have to think about where can we go on a regular basis to make sure we get green spaces and exercise.
Yeah. And guess what? Beaches are free, right? Most parking may not be, but most beaches are free. Yeah. Public parks are just like that. They're free, even inside other neighborhoods. So once you get there, it's now free at that point. And that's the beauty of things. This is another study that kind of, once again, was kind of reflecting what we were talking about before already in terms of discrepancies in terms of vitamin D levels, and seeing this really as it relates to different ethnic groups and so forth. And the incidence of vitamin D deficiency is much higher in people of color compared to others. And so it's a combination.
And we didn't say this earlier. Let me just, I forgot to say it earlier when we were talking about the sun. Vitamin D, and maybe you did say it, but vitamin D is a very powerful anti-inflammatory.
Yes.
Which is why it probably helped. Even though I agree with you, I think it was more a marker than it was the actual single thing helping with COVID. It had to be bigger than that. And I think it's partly why people say, well, why did Africa seem to do better? There's a lot of reasons. One of them might just be the sun and the sun exposure. So this vitamin D literally is cool. It will actually turn down inflammation, which is what gives us a lot of the diseases we have. Not just build stronger bones. It will literally turn down inflammation in our body.
Yes. Powerful stuff. I think one of the things, people may still be saying, well, man, okay, well, is this really true? And so what this slide depicts, especially for those who aren't used to seeing it, is that when you looked at areas that we now know as redlined areas, where you looked at suitability for people to live at. And so we understand the areas that were classified as having minorities inside of it, and they call it the unsavory. They were allocated spaces that were really not provided resources. They were the worst lots and things of that nature. And what we see when you juxtapose those same maps on modern day images, not only do you see higher heat, we talk about the heat wave to begin with, right? So New York Times has reported this, multiple research has reported that there's a higher degrees of temperature in these areas. And why is that? Because it has less exposure to parks in the green areas inside these cities that are there. And that's what this is reflecting there. And there's obviously a relationship in terms of wealth too as well. And this shows, doesn't matter if you're in Baltimore, Portland, if you're in Austin, Texas, or you're in Columbus, Ohio, that we look at based upon your median income, right? So it's not a black or white thing always anymore. At this point in time, now it's progressed to a dollar thing.
Socioeconomic. Yep.
It's social economics completely, which means that if you're less likely, we just talked about this, right? The neighborhoods we grew up in are probably nothing like what I'm blessed to live in neighborhoods now that have greenery and things of that nature. And this slide really depicts that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Two things. There's another study that basically talked even about simple things like walkways. You think about, well, why are people going for walks? Well, have you ever lived in a neighborhood where there's really no sidewalks, or the sidewalks are really kind of are destructed, and so you don't, it's not safe? I've been there. I've been there, whether it's in New Orleans or different areas around the country, in certain segments of the population, that you'll see there's a lack of infrastructure, a city infrastructure that's there. And this manifests itself perhaps in terms of the accidents and the greater number of pedestrian deaths that we'll see as a result. So why would I walk in these areas when I can't at this point? And so it tells us from a societal perspective, there's a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do. All right. Another one, this is kind of looking at the same sort of thing in terms of the infrastructure that's there. And we get the history of this, right? I think it was several years now that I think Pete Buttigieg said something about highways are racist, or we have to change that tone. And people were like, what are you talking about? You know, highways aren't racist. How can a concrete structure be racist?
Highways are cut through black neighborhoods for sure, all across America. There's no question about that. Yeah. And it played into the redlining and all of those problems.
Yeah. Yeah. So we see all that stuff happen, and this is all these things here kind of tell us the same issue. So we understand that there are disparities in access in, number one, performing exercises, and there's a lot of limitations, reasons for that. We see it in terms of exposure to nature, and we see it really in terms of just in terms of walking and sidewalks, and the infrastructure is definitely there too as well. All right. I see that Danette, you're back. You have there's some questions for us, some thoughts?
Yes, sir. You got a lot of questions and a lot of thoughts. So I've been posting the comments, but there is a question or several. So let's see if we can get through these. So maybe one of you can take the answer, and then we can move to the next one. But how much time do you need to spend in direct sunlight? Columbus, I'll give that to you.
All right. So usually roughly about, we talked about it indirectly earlier, that when you go on the cusp early morning, you can get that early morning sunlight, 20 to 30 minutes will help in terms of like the serotonin and the melanocyte stimulation that's there. When you look at vitamin D level, you're probably going to need a little bit longer. And for people of color, it's probably going to be about double for that of someone else. So you're probably looking closer to about 40 to 50 minutes, close to around an hour or so in terms of the amount of time that one would need inside of the sun. I think on an individual basis, we have to all be wise. We have to look at what our conditions are, if we have a propensity towards certain issues, and so everyone is unique, is what I'll say as it relates to that.
Okay. And you answered
check your levels. Check your levels. Get your vitamin D levels checked.
Check your levels for sure.
And you answered the second question, which was, does your complexion indicate how much time you should spend in the sun? And so you kind of answered that. If you're darker complexion, double that, all right?
Yeah, at least double it, yep.
At least double it. Okay, so for you, Dr. Walsh, are you ready?
Yep.
All right. What is the best time of day to walk outdoors to maximize sun benefits?
So we just mentioned it. The best time of day really is dusk and dawn. Partly because the sun, your risk of the negative consequence of the sun are lower. Mm-hmm. But if you have, if you're home at 2:00 in the afternoon when the sun is really high and hot, if you can put on light clothing, really thin clothing to cover cover most of you, a lot of the benefits of the sun you get through ultraviolet radiation, which does penetrate the skull, go in, dilate vessels, stimulates the brain. There's all the things we talked about with serotonin to the retina. So you can still get the benefits, but you do have to be more careful if you're going to spend hours a day out in the sun, which is what really is going to drastically increase the risk of skin cancer. You definitely don't want to do that.
Okay. There was another question specifically for you, and someone wanted to know, have you ever done any baptisms at the beach?
Actually, I have, in Australia, actually. It was
okay.
Awesome.
All right, fantastic. All right, Dr. Batiste, you're up next. Are you ready?
Yeah, listen, you stay ready, you don't have to get ready.
All right. Are there any exercise concerns that you have based on a person's age?
Not based on a person's age. I would think based upon their underlying conditions. So if they unfortunately have arthritis or they have some type of spinal injury, I think all those things have to be taken into consideration. I think one of the key things is that's why walking is so powerful, because walking is a daily type of activity that most people are able to do. But there's some who have knee injuries and have major issues there that they can't. Walking in the pool is even better, because now you eliminate the gravity that's there. And so looking at different ways is like, can I do cycling? Once again, the most important exercise or the best exercise is the one that you can do sustainably on a repeated basis. And even better, if your spouse will come with you and do it with you. Isn't that right?
Moving on to the next question. All right. And so
let me throw this in there real quick. There's a guy at the Altadena SDA Church, Brother Musson, Brent's dad, and this guy would go flying. He's in his 80s, go flying past me on his bicycle when I was out walking around the Rose Bowl. You'd see him, just amazing. If you don't stop, it's much harder for your body to stop, which is one of the reasons why you just want to keep exercising all the time.
All right. So it's been said of exercise, no pain, no gain. Is this true? And when should you be concerned?
Well, there's several aspects to it. I'm gonna start, and then Eric let you kind of pick up too as well.
Okay,
So
we're short on time, so we only.
All right, I'll make it short. I'll make it short
right.
too as well. If I'm doing resistance training, weightlifting, it's natural. I'm going to break my muscles down. There's going to be a level of pain that's existing that's there. Now we have to be very wise in our approach and listen to our bodies, and I think that's the key thing. And as we incorporate nutrition along with our exercise, we can decrease the inflammatory response from some of those activities. And so I'll leave it there.
Okay, so since you took his slot. Okay, so if you are recovering from a heart attack, is there a limit to exercise? Columbus.
Well, I recommend cardiac rehab. Go
ahead, Eric.
No. Let Columbus answer. He's the cardiologist. It's better he answer this one. Go ahead.
All right.
No, I think there's so many layers to that question, and it's on an individual basis. My recommendation strongly is really about entering cardiac rehab. Our goal is for you to be a piece of Tupperware, not a piece of fine china. We want you to get back to your full level of activity. It's just going to be a matter of time, engaging on the amount or the size of your heart attack in the situation.
All right, Dr. Walsh. What are the benefits of weight training versus cardio for menopausal or premenopausal women?
So first of all, I recommend if you can figure out a way to do both, do both. The cardiovascular, we talk mostly about cardiovascular exercise, walking, swimming. That's the benefits we talked about so far on the show. That's really what we were talking about. Resistance training is different. Dr. Batiste mentioned it a second ago. You literally put micro tears in your muscles. Your body doesn't put the muscles back together like this. It fills it in with new muscle. Why is that important? The more muscle mass you have, the better faster your metabolism is going to be. So you're going to have a higher resting metabolism. It also stimulates growth hormone and even sex hormones, making you stronger, giving you more vitality. So resistance training is actually very, very important. It keeps your body toned, fit, makes it so that way into your old age, you'll be able to get up and do what you want to do. So you want to do both if possible, but start with cardiovascular. Walking is a resistance exercise on some levels as well, of course. And that's why the pole walking is actually very good too, because you get a little bit of resistance with that. But do some weight training once you can, even if it's just your own body weight with push-ups and pull-ups and stuff like that.
Fantastic.
And I just have to add, I have to add this in here because it's important. It's important there, host. All right, is the fact that we lose our muscle mass as we get older. That's right. Why it's so important. We all will lose it, so we have to make sure that we're intentional in terms of our efforts. Just want to throw that in there.
We appreciate that. Now, how do you protect yourself from skin cancer while using sunblock? And, and also what about protecting yourself against skin cancer? I know you've talked about this as well, but I wanted to have a direct answer to the question.
Time of day, amount of exposure, and making sure you take some breaks in the shade. Making sure that your sunscreen is reapplied every 4 to 6 hours, depending on what the bottle says. Making sure you put on your sunscreen before you put on insect repellent. And if you come out of the water, reapply the sunscreen.
Okay. And someone has said, I've been getting my sun in the shade. Does this count for vitamin D?
You will get some vitamin D from it, but you do need to get some direct sunlight as well. So you do want to come out of this, if you're going to be out, let's say you're going to be at this past holiday, you were out at a picnic, whatever, and you're in the shade most of the time. You want to come out 5-10 minutes at a time, get some sun, walk around a little bit, then you can go back in the shade. And if you do that you're there 6 hours, you do that every hour, you're going to get more than enough sun without overexposing yourself all at once.
Fantastic. Mm-hmm. All right. Dr. Batiste, what is the recommended dose of vitamin D or the recommended values?
Yeah, so real quick in terms of the and I may have to have Dr. Walsh. Maybe I need to go get some exercise. I'm having a moment right now in terms of the exact dosage. I don't want to give you the wrong one, but in terms of the sunlight, think of Superman, right? If Superman is just in the shade, he's not going to get his health back if he's been exposed to kryptonite. He has to be in front of the direct sunlight if he's going to get restored to all of his superpowers. So you have to use that concept that's there, but also the concept of, Icarus? Don't fly too high to the sun. Don't get too much exposure either, right? Otherwise, you're going to fall and crash. Anyway, Eric, I'm gonna turn
on the vitamin D one. So the dose is depending on your levels. So you do need to know what your vitamin D levels are. And ideally, you'd have to check it during the year. So for us here in Connecticut, the sun is less potent because it's much lower in the sky in the winter, and it's a much shorter period of day you have to get sun in it. So summertime, you can get a lot more sun and get better vitamin D results from the same amount of time in the sun. So the vitamin D dose in terms of capsules, I recommend 5,000 international units a day up to 10,000 international units a day. Most people do not take 5,000 international units a day. They take much less. So I would say talk to your doctor, but if you want to start with 2,500 to 5,000, most people take paltry too low. In terms of what level of vitamin D you want when you get your lab results, in Africa, they've done studies on tribes that are in the sun all day. They don't wear, a lot of them aren't wearing shirts a lot of time, and they have vitamin D levels up over 100. And so we say like 30. If you can get to 30, you're good. Mm-hmm. I tell people, listen, you probably want to double that. You want to try and get to 50, 60, 70, because vitamin D is not a vitamin. It doesn't have the toxicity risk like vitamin A does. It's actually a hormone. And that's partly why it's so powerful. So you definitely want to get it up there. I take 10,000 international units of vitamin D every single day, and have for a long time. And so I recommend at least 5,000, but if you at least do 2,500 if you're worried. But get your levels, because if your levels are high, you may not even, if you live in Miami and you're out all day, you may not need to take any at all.
All right, fantastic. I'm gonna go ahead and leave you now to close. Thank you.
been given the edict to close it up.
Well,
yeah, that's right. She said, "Go on, get out of here." No. The one thing I was going to add, really, in terms of it, I brought up like a lot of points of how vitamin D might not be beneficial for heart health and some other aspects that are there where the data is discrepant, or it's back and forth. I think overall, when I look at the risk-benefit ratios, how I approach things like this. So do I take vitamin D? I do take vitamin D. I have about 5,000 units. I have a 10,000, probably take the 5,000 more. I was probably taking more during the COVID because of just the uncertainty in terms of that period of time. So I think you have to weigh the pros and cons of your approach for supplements as the data varies. But the one thing where the data does not vary is the things that has been provided for you. Sunlight, exercise, whole food, plant-based nutrition, sleep, rest, social connectivity, right? These are things that have been consistently proven to be beneficial, and you don't have to worry about shirking your attempts at indulging those things.
And I want to finish with one follow-up on the vitamin D. The Africa study was really powerful. And I was working in maternal child adolescent health, and one of the things that was really deep is that if at those high levels, the babies are not born vitamin D deficient, which tells us that the high levels, the really high levels, I'm talking above 70, are probably what's so normal. And the reason so many of our babies, most of our babies are born vitamin D with low levels is because the babies aren't even being in utero in higher levels of vitamin D. So I want to throw that out there that, we don't, a lot of times doctors are afraid because they don't know, but there are studies that show higher levels are not only healthy, they may actually be what's natural if we lived in a more natural state than we do now.
Yes, yes, yes. Man, this is a good episode. I think right now I'm gonna need to get out there and do a little exercise before sun goes down and get me some movement in.
Sunset's here in about 10 minutes, but I might just run out there myself.
Yeah, get a little something in there. But man, it's always good to see you. It's good to kind
You
of
too.
connect with the folks again. It's good being
Yes.
back live. We'll see if we can kind of get another live one set up for August, maybe towards the latter part. If not live, it'll be taped, but we're gonna come back at you and deliver some more information that hopefully will change your life. Don't forget to like us. Don't forget to share with someone else that you know. Share this information. Subscribe. All right, good people. We'll see you next month. Dr. Walsh, good to see you.
All right, you too, brother.